In 1311, an African king stood at the edge of his golden empire with 2,000 ships ready to sail west into the unknown Atlantic. Columbus wouldn't be born for another 140 years. His name was Abu Bakr II, ruler of the richest kingdom on earth, and he was about to trade it all for a single burning question. What lies beyond the Sea of Darkness? Giant stone heads in Mexico with unmistakably African features. European explorers writing about black-skinned people already living in the Americas. Ancient maps showing African trade routes across an ocean that was supposedly impossible to cross. This is the story mainstream history refuses to tell you. Now, before we dive in, we need to be clear. These theories are fiercely debated. Most archaeologists reject the evidence we're about to examine, but the questions won't go away, and the anomalies keep piling up. Today, we're investigating the controversial evidence that Africans reached America 181 years before Columbus. We'll examine what the proponents claim, what the skeptics say, and let you decide what really happened when a king traded his empire for exploration. Maybe the most surprising place to start looking for pre-Columbian Africans isn't in an ancient ruin, but in the pages of the European explorers' own diaries. Proponents of this theory point again and again to a fascinating entry from Christopher Columbus himself. On his third voyage, Columbus wasn't just mapping coastlines. He was listening to the stories of the native Taino people in Hispaniola, the island we now know as Haiti and the Dominican Republic. According to the theory's supporters, this is where Columbus heard that other people had visited before him. They point to his journal, where he notes the Taino told him about traders who came from the south and southeast in large canoes. These visitors carried spears tipped with a metal the natives called guanine. And here's where it gets specific. Columbus got his hands on some of these spearheads and sent them back to Spain. An analysis showed the metal was an alloy of gold, silver, and copper. Scholars like Leo Weiner in the 1920s and later Ivan Van Sertima pounced on this. They argued this specific alloy, and even the word guanine, came directly from West Africa, where similar metalworking traditions existed. To them, the word guanin itself could be traced back to West African languages for gold. For them, it was a smoking gun. How could Native Americans describe visitors carrying spears made of a metal alloy that seemed identical to ones made in West Africa, unless there had been contact? But this is where mainstream historians pump the brakes. First, interpreting Columbus's journals is tricky. The idea that he clearly wrote about black-skinned people is largely an interpretation by scholars like Van Sertima. Critics say they're stretching the original texts, which are much more vague. The story is secondhand, and historians caution that Columbus was known to exaggerate to make his voyages seem more important and get more funding from Spain. So what about the guanine alloy? Well, similar gold-copper alloys, known as tumbaga, were actually common all over pre-Columbian South and Central America. Archaeometallurgists say the specific mix of metals isn't unique to West Africa at all, and could easily have been a local invention. There's just no definitive proof the metal, or its name, had to have come from across the ocean. Columbus wasn't the only one, though. Another account often cited comes from Vasco Núñez de Balboa, the first European to see the Pacific from the Americas. In 1513, while crossing Panama, Balboa and his men reportedly stumbled upon a community of people who looked startlingly different. A chronicler of the expedition, Peter Martir d'Anguera, wrote that Balboa found a settlement of people he described as Negroes, who were at war with the neighboring tribes. Proponents see this as another bombshell. A famous Spanish explorer apparently documenting a surviving population of Africans living in Panama. The implication was clear. They must be the remnants of a pre-Columbian voyage. But again, historians urge caution. The word Negro just means black in Spanish. In the 16th century, it could have been used to describe any group with darker skin than the people nearby, including a dark-skinned indigenous group. Without any archaeological or genetic evidence, no African artifacts, no burials with African DNA from that time in that area, the account is just an ambiguous observation, not proof. These stories from the explorers are compelling because they come from the very men credited with discovering the Americas. But when you look closely, they're wrapped in ambiguity and lack the hard evidence to back them up. Long before the Maya and the Aztecs, a civilization known as the Olmec flourished in the jungles of south-central Mexico. Often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica, they thrived from around 1200 to 400 BCE. But their most iconic and mysterious legacy is the Olmec colossal heads. These things are gigantic, carved from huge basalt boulders. Some stand 15 feet tall and weigh up to 40 tons. And for over a century, their faces have been at the center of a huge debate. The controversy started right away. When the first head was discovered in 1862, the archaeologist José Melgar was stunned. He wrote, "What astonished me was the Ethiopic type represented. I reflected that there had been blacks in this country. He was the first, but definitely not the last, to say this. The features carved in stone, the broad, flat noses, the full lips, looked distinctly African to many people. This eye test became a cornerstone of the theory that the Olmec civilization was either founded by, or heavily influenced by, visitors from Africa. This idea was argued most powerfully by Ivan Van Sertima in his 1976 book, They Came Before Columbus. He proposed that Africans, specifically Nubian Egyptian rulers, sailed to the Americas around 700 BCE and became the Olmec ruling class. The colossal heads, he argued, were realistic portraits of these African kings. It's a captivating theory. It paints a picture of incredible maritime skill and cultural exchange. To support it, proponents also point to other clues, like the work of a controversial Polish anthropologist, Andrzej Wiercinski, who claimed he'd found African skeletons at Olmec sites. However, the scientific consensus is overwhelming and clear. The Olmec were not Africans. Mainstream archaeology, anthropology, and genetics all say this theory is wrong. Let's start with the heads. While the features might look African to us today, archaeologists argue that we're just seeing them through the lens of modern racial categories. The broad noses and full lips are features found among the indigenous people of that very region in Mexico. They aren't uniquely African traits. As one person of Aztec heritage wrote online, "I cannot express just how common those features are. I have a wide nose and I'm half Aztec and half European." The consensus today is that the heads are portraits of powerful Olmec rulers who were 100% Native American. But the nail in the coffin comes from genetics. Multiple studies of ancient DNA from skeletal remains at Olmec sites have been done. The results are conclusive. The DNA is purely of indigenous American origin. There is zero trace of African DNA from that period. If an African ruling class had been living, dying, and being buried there, their genetic signature would show up. It doesn't. And those claims of African skeletons? The work of Wiercinski has been thoroughly discredited. His methods are considered outdated and unreliable, and his findings have never been backed up by peer-reviewed studies. The Olmec enigma shows how what we think we see can clash with scientific data. The faces on the stones are powerful, but the combined weight of archaeology, anthropology, and especially genetics tells a different story. The masters who created these monuments were the indigenous people of ancient Mexico. We're diving into one of history's biggest what-ifs, and there's still more to uncover. If you're enjoying this journey, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next as we investigate the incredible story of a Malian king who may have led one of the largest naval expeditions in history. Section 3. The Voyage of the Forgotten King, Mansa Abu Bakr II. In the 14th century, the Mali Empire was one of the wealthiest on earth. Its most famous ruler, Mansa Musa, was so rich that when he made his pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, he gave away so much gold in Cairo that he crashed the local economy for a decade. But this story isn't about him. It's about his predecessor, a mysterious ruler named Mansa Abu Bakr II. According to one compelling historical account, Abu Bakr wasn't satisfied with his land-based empire. He was obsessed with the Atlantic Ocean. The entire story comes to us from Mansa Musa himself. While in Cairo, Musa told an Arab historian named al-Umari how he got the throne. He said Abu Bakr II became convinced it was possible to find the other side of the ocean. He was a king driven by discovery, not conquest. So, he put together a massive first expedition, 200 ships, filled with sailors, supplies, and a simple instruction: don't come back until you find the end of the ocean or run out of food. The fleet sailed west and vanished. A long time later, a single ship returned. The captain told a terrifying story. He said the ships got caught in a powerful current, like a river in the ocean, that swept them towards a great whirlpool. His was the only ship to escape. Was Abu Bakr discouraged? Not at all. It only made him more determined. He ordered a new fleet, this one even bigger, 2,000 ships. 1,000 for the explorers, and another 1,000 packed with supplies. In the year 1311, Abu Bakr II did something almost unheard of. He abdicated his throne, handed power over to his brother, Mansa Musa, and then sailed west into the Atlantic to lead the expedition himself. He was never seen again. For supporters of the African contact theory, this isn't a myth, it's history. They argue that Abu Bakr II and his fleet, pushed by the ocean currents that flow from West Africa straight to the Americas, made it. They believe the Malians landed somewhere in Brazil or the Caribbean, about 180 years before Columbus, setting up colonies and trading with native peoples. This, they say, is where the stories of black-skinned traders Columbus heard about came from. It's a powerful, romantic story. But what's the actual evidence? Well, the entire story hangs on that one single conversation Mansa Musa had in Cairo. There are no records from the Mali Empire that mention this voyage. No journals from Abu Bakr or his sailors. Only the story told by the man who inherited the throne after the king disappeared. This leads many historians to think it might have just been a story Musa told to legitimize his own rule. And just like with the Olmec, there is a profound lack of hard evidence in the Americas. If a fleet of thousands of Malians had landed and set up colonies, we'd expect to find something. Malian artifacts, ruins, their distinctive Islamic art, or their graves. We'd expect to see a clear West African genetic signature in the local populations. To date, nothing has been found. Not one verified 14th century Malian artifact has ever been dug up in the Americas. The story of Abu Bakr II is an incredible tale about the spirit of exploration, but without any proof, it remains a historical mystery, not a historical fact. Beyond the big theories, the case for pre-Columbian African contact is pieced together from other controversial clues, from architecture, botany, and even toxicology. First, pyramids. Proponents look at the step pyramids in Egypt and then at the step pyramids built by cultures like the Maya and Aztecs, and they see a connection. The argument is that the idea of building giant step pyramids is so specific it must have been carried from Africa to the Americas. But architects and archaeologists disagree. While we call them both pyramids, they had different purposes. Egyptian pyramids were sealed tombs for pharaohs. Mesoamerican pyramids were temples, with stairs leading up to a platform for public rituals. The similar shape is likely a case of convergent evolution. Two different cultures independently figured out that a pyramid is the most stable way to build a really tall stone structure. Then there's the truly bizarre evidence from toxicology. In 1992, a German toxicologist named Svetlana Balabanova was testing ancient Egyptian mummies and found something shocking: traces of nicotine and cocaine in their hair. Here's the problem. Tobacco and coca are plants native to the Americas. They supposedly didn't exist in the Old World before Columbus. So how could an ancient Egyptian pharaoh have traces of American drugs in his system? For believers in pre-Columbian contact, this was slam-dunk proof of an ancient trade route. However, the scientific community was extremely skeptical. The most likely explanation? Modern contamination. These mummies had been handled, transported, and stored for over a century. It's very plausible they were contaminated by tiny amounts of modern tobacco smoke or even from the researchers themselves. Since this discovery, no other evidence of this trade, like coca leaves in tombs or Egyptian artifacts in Peru, has ever been found. Finally, there's botany, Some argue that plants like a certain type of cotton and gourds seem to have spread between continents before Columbus, and that humans must have carried them. But botanists have shown that many seeds can survive a long time in salt water and could have just floated across on ocean currents. In other cases, plants that look the same turned out to be genetically distinct species that just evolved to look similar. Each of these clues is a fascinating puzzle, but in each case, the mainstream scientific explanation relies on things like convergent evolution, contamination, or natural ocean drift, rather than an extraordinary voyage across the sea. This theory didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was built and promoted by a few passionate and very controversial scholars. To understand the theory, you have to understand the men who built it, Leo Wiener and especially Ivan Van Sertima. Leo Wiener was a professor at Harvard in the 1920s. He was a linguist, a master of languages. In his book, Africa and the Discovery of America, he argued that the linguistic parallels between African and Native American languages were too many to be a coincidence. He was one of the first to connect the word Guanine to West African languages in Columbus's journals. His work was academic and dense, but it laid the groundwork for what came next. That breakthrough came 50 years later with Ivan Van Sertima's They Came Before Columbus. Van Sertima was a professor of Africana Studies at Rutgers University. His 1976 book took all the pieces of evidence, the Olmec heads, Columbus's journal, the story of Abu Bakr II, and wove them into one powerful, easy-to-read story. His thesis was specific. Nubian Egyptians came around 700 BCE and influenced the Olmecs, and the Malians came in 1311. They Came Before Columbus was a bestseller. It came out during a time of rising Black consciousness and a demand for a less Eurocentric view of history. The book gave people a story of African achievement and exploration that stood in sharp contrast to the history that usually began with slavery. For many, it was a revolutionary and empowering work that reclaimed a lost piece of Black history. However, the academic world rejected it almost completely. Mainstream historians and archaeologists accused Van Sertima of misinterpreting evidence, cherry-picking data, and making huge leaps of logic. They basically said his work was pseudo-archaeology, meaning he started with a conclusion he wanted to be true, and then worked backward to find evidence to support it, instead of the other way around. Despite the academic rejection, Van Sertima's influence was massive. He created a powerful counter-narrative that continues to inspire people to question the history they were taught. He is the main architect of this alternate history, forcing a showdown between popular belief and scientific consensus. So, after all that, what do we make of it? We've looked at the ambiguous lines in Columbus's journal, stood before the silent stone faces of the Olmec, and sailed on a phantom voyage with a Malian king. This body of evidence, championed by thinkers like Ivan Van Sertima, creates a powerful story of African ingenuity and a global presence that predates European colonialism. It suggests the New World wasn't so new, but was a crossroads for millennia. And yet, we have to face the other side. The overwhelming consensus from the global scientific community is that there is no verifiable proof of a major pre-Columbian African presence in the Americas. For every claim, mainstream science offers a counter-explanation. The Olmec heads are portraits of indigenous Americans, confirmed by DNA. The guanine alloy was a local invention. The story of Abu Bakr II is an amazing tale, but it's just a tale without physical proof. The whole theory, while compelling, is considered by experts to be pseudo-archaeology. So if the scientific evidence isn't there, why is this idea still so powerful? Maybe it's because it speaks to a deeper need. It offers a counter-story to centuries of history written by the victors, a history that has often ignored or erased the achievements of non-European people. It challenges the whole concept of discovery. Ultimately, history isn't a dead object. It's a story we are constantly retelling and arguing over. While the physical evidence for Africans in the Americas before Columbus remains unproven in the eyes of mainstream science, the idea itself has reshaped conversations about race and history. It forces us to ask critical questions. Whose stories get told, and whose get dismissed? And how do we find the line between a story that empowers and the hard, verifiable evidence that history demands? Sometimes the questions we ask are more important than the answers we find. What do you think? Is this a forgotten chapter of world history or a captivating myth? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, please hit that like button and share this video. It helps us keep exploring these fascinating topics. Thanks for watching.